I was raised during and grew up in the years after the Second World War. I realized the First World War was supposed to be the war to end all wars, and yet, as a nation, we've had nothing but war. But it was a noble war, and I really admired these people who came back, and as I delivered papers through the town, I enjoyed talking to these veterans, and these veterans, I don't think they made much of their own experiences, those who had the most gruesome of them, but they always reminded me, just by being, of the responsibility I had. And again, I was very mischievous, and by this time by high school time anyway, I'd been kicked out of school, but in the time preceding it, I really didn't enjoy what I was doing. I felt I was harassed. I was harassed simply for being alive and being told I was going to hell in a school where I was made to believe everything the authorities gave us. And I think then, by the time I went to college, I had a reasonable idea that I was more attracted to being a female than in chasing females by far. And I wasn't, and I felt I couldn't be. And yet I had this guidance from Mr. Roberts. And then I can remember the experience, I suppose the first experience, because I was in high school during the Sputnik years, and of course any of us who had, I won't say any, but many of us who had some intelligence of sorts went into science and went into engineering, and I guess maybe in a way to pay back those who won the Second World War. I don't know about that, but anyway, I was at the University of Michigan. I don't even remember the dormitory. It was on the floor of the ground floor of South Quad. And I was among mostly architects, and they were busy people. And I was in chemistry and chemical engineering, those sorts of things, and pretty elaborate mathematics. And I had not yet learned to love physics or education, and at one time I just got tired of studying, of looking at things that were difficult for me because I didn't like them, I gather. I think my only ambition was to be the head brewer at Stroh's Brewery. And I picked up The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. And how stunning it was. It was a book about Sisyphus, the myth, the story, but only indirectly. It was a story about the meaning of life to him. And essentially it came down to two questions. The first of these was answered in The Myth of Sisyphus. A person logically didn't commit suicide, didn't kill himself, because in the process, in some way or another, he would be cheating. He would be cheating life, is the way I saw it. And so Sisyphus, for committing some sin or some crime against Zeus, was made to push this rock up the hill. And when it got to the top, down it went. And again and again and again and again, and that was his life forever and ever. And first I thought that would be my life. It was, to climb against the rock of self, the rock of society. And all I had, I suppose, going for me, but it was enough, was Mr. Roberts then. But The Myth of Sisyphus was the first book of Camus, and then I read as much as I could that he wrote, and eventually came upon The Rebel, which I think is his story for Albert Camus. If life is meaningless, and after Ecclesiastes, after Mr. Roberts, I pretty well considered that while life really has no meaning, it has its uses, I suppose. And since I've been around for a while, I guess I've stuck it out. There have been times, though. But the Rebel is a different kind of story. Why, if life is meaningless, does man survive? Why did Camus, who had this understanding, this self-understanding, but this doesn't come to much? Why? Why didn't he kill indiscriminately? You know, why did he maintain his life? Why did he fight against the Nazis? Why did he risk his own life continuously during that period? Why later on did he become part of the Algerian freedom movement? And then eventually, did he kill himself, as Mr. Thomas Hagen did? We don't know. He ran a beautiful car into a tree. But anyway, why didn't he? And he had, I suppose from the Greeks, a dialectic. Man doesn't because he doesn't. Although a person is many people anyway, some people are rebellious, and he discusses the nature of rebellion, but essentially he reduced life to the master and the slave. A person can be a master, a person can be a slave. And if a slave, there are times he'd rather be a master, I suppose. So there was these two things in his life, as in mine by then, I found. There's this life of living in society and this life of living within myself. So anyway, man not only has this desire to rebel, or at least some people do, to be dissatisfied with the conditions of life as they are, and to seek the means of doing something about it, in art sometimes, in history and military, and in every phase of life there can be an element of rebelliousness that may or may not turn to revolution. Rebellion does not necessarily lead to revolution. To Mr. Roberts and my mischievous and all of that kind of thing. But there's a second striving that certainly was part of me, that man is a social animal, and he has responsibilities for society, or feels he does. And that's that story. That's why he rebelled against the Nazis. He must. He rebelled against life. He must. At the same time, he lived and dedicated himself to a society, to some element of hope that things can be made better by people. It was this human element. It wasn't the existential man simply just lives for no reason at all. The reason was his social part, that man's responsibility, and I caught on to that. And that kind of guided me. I don't know if through college for I did self-destruct for a bit, but I think reading Camus during this time, this kind of end phase of schooling, I gave myself the sustenance to keep on moving on, I suppose. Well, this is kind of serious stuff, isn't it? But it's so. Did I realize this at the time? And the answer is no. I just was mostly partying down. I was living among people, but I was very, very sullen. I wasn't a good person to be around, and I knew it. And unless I was drunk, I was never much of a social animal. And then eventually I tired of that, I suppose, and of the cruelties I felt myself subjected to, and so on. But I had these things, and I suppose that's the serious stuff I'm trying to write about, and I'm trying to make a story about. Yeah, often life is futile and all of that stuff. But what is the meaning? And I don't know. But I hope there is one, huh? But I don't know. I have no idea what it is. But I do know that there have been people through the years who guided me, both in that part of life that I attribute to the women I've admired and looked at, and part to people who've tried to describe what we can do with our lives. What we can do with our lives. I suppose, just as kind of a last reminder, I think of often of trips I took with my mother to Chicago. Not often, but they were infrequent, but we did. To the Art Institute. And how impressed she was certain with the grandioseness of Italian art of the late 15th, 16th century of the Netherlands. I think she even, although I don't recall ever seeing one, gave me some insight into Vermeer. But there were two paintings, one that I suppose she was trying to get me back to religion, the Assumption it was of El Greco, the Greek. The magnificent painting, part of a triptych, I believe it was, and that wound up in the Art Institute. But alongside it was the strangest St. Francis, is, I was used to the birds and all of that, and he isn't my namesake, despite the nuns telling me it was. But that picture, it was a person in gray. I think it was a precursor to, it's an El Greco, a precursor to the Picasso copy I have over here, of him looking at a skull, if he was, or along in front of him was a skull. He was in gray. And that little painting, my size painting, versus this magnificent El Greco, told me something, and I never knew what it was. But, just by doing things, just by looking at things, and being given the opportunity to do so, I really did very, very slowly, when a lot of hacking here and there did carve out a bit of a life of some meaning, I think. Again, although I really don't know what it is. It's so difficult to state. I think the reason I'm having such trouble putting this into words onto paper, and maybe this is a way out of this. And to Gnosticism next. Or Gnosticism.